Hey, I'm excited. Oh, thanks for tuning back into the Davidson podcast. This is episode 123 with Dr. Barbara E. Milton Jr. And she is a disabled retired clinical social worker who has for 40 years worked on behalf of at-risk children and families. And she's been living with bladder cancer and other chronic illnesses, and she continues to have a voice through her YouTube channel and uses her breath and her life in service of her health and her healing, putting love and hope into the world. And she believes that love can conquer hate. And she believes in equality and justice for all matters. And she currently lives in New Jersey with her wife, Kay, where she's busy writing several books about her life, her beloved mother, and her social work career, and her research examining the content of slave narratives. And together they enjoy a rich life filled with family and friends.
Indeed. Thank
Yeah.
you, Davidson.
Yes, oh my God, I'm so excited to talk with you about like your book is just so beautiful and it's so touching. And I mean, I feel like not a lot of people talk about how hard it is to deal with when your parents have dementia and Alzheimer's. And I know a lot of families like struggle with that, but honestly, I feel like there's not a lot of people openly talking about how hard it is.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're just normal folks. I appreciate you listing all those things about me and my wonderful career as a clinical social worker. I mean, when you list those things, my first thought is like, my goodness, have I deserved some rest? You know, and just at the point in my career when I was felled by a very pernicious and chronic and dangerous form of bladder cancer. Just at that point in my life, my mother phoned me up in 2015 and she said, "You got to come down here. Something is wrong with me." And it was like the call that you never want to receive from your parent.
Mm,
It was so unlike her to call me for any help at all. She's quite independent and
mm,
self-reliant and self-sufficient. I am too. And to receive that phone call at the time in my life when I most needed some rest,
mm,
and to learn very quickly in due course that she was in the throes of this very debilitating, life-threatening, fatal disease process with Alzheimer's was quite a jarring experience. And so whatever rest I may have needed, I needed to figure out a way to take on my mom's life and become her caregiver because I am an only
mm,
child. My mother is Barbara Ella Milton Sr., and I am her only offspring. And that duty felt to me. And I wasn't quite sure I could heed the call, which is why I wrote a book titled Heeding the Caregiver Call. This is the book
mm.
here, and
Yeah.
that's a picture of my mother.
No.
Um, yeah, Heeding the Caregiver Call: The Story of Barbara Ella Milton Sr. and Alzheimer's Disease, written by me. And so that was the start of it. Getting that phone call that fall of 2015, learning she was in the grips very quickly, and that she was in the grips of a confirmed case of Alzheimer's, and then taking on her life in its entirety. And I think you're so right, Davidson. Uh, uh, it's a difficult thing to talk about. I mean, I'm in my 60s. I think probably many of the people in your listening and viewing audience are significantly younger than I am.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot in this process that beckoned me to wonder what would have happened had I thought about this in my 30s.
Hmm.
So I'm very glad that you're podcast to have this conversation about how we show up to be able to meet the needs of our loved ones, whether it's our spouses, whether it's our parents, our grandparents, whether it's a really good friend who, except for you, an alone person. Like, what does it mean to show up and heed a call to help provide care for them without hurting yourself? And how do you balance all of that out?
Yeah.
And so that's the book I wrote. I wrote a book about the journey, all the issues we faced, all the knowledge we gained, all the lessons learned. And I further describe how the experience altered my mother and I's relationship for the better. And let me share with you what that thread of the story is about. I'm from Camden, New Jersey. My mother was born in Camden, New Jersey. You were born in Camden, New Jersey.
Yeah.
Growing up in Camden in the 40s for my mother, she was one of 11 children. She was the eldest daughter. This city, not too dissimilar from a southern city in Mississippi. Racially charged, very poor. Racism was alive and well. And my mother bared the brunt of actual society structured that way. She was called the N-word. She was denied plenty of access to all kinds of, they were very, very poor. And in Black families, when you are the eldest daughter, and I'm not sure if this is, it's probably true in many other cultures, but in the Black family, the eldest daughter has a particular responsibility in the family. So grandmom worked. She did days work. She was cleaning the homes of folks in, or not even rich, and in Morristown and more wealthier communities around Camden. And when she did that work, she was vacant from her own home. And so my mother had to step in to raise the children, her siblings. And that translated into a lot of lost time with her own childhood, a lot of lost time in school. It translated into a lot of not getting a lot of food to eat herself out of regard for making sure the younger siblings had food, the younger siblings had good shoes, the younger siblings had clothing. And she sacrificed a lot of her childhood. And what took its place instead was just a sort of compounding layering of resentment and anger and trauma that she just had nestled in the being of her, in her center, in her core. And then at 14, she became pregnant with me. And back in those days, when you were pregnant while your family was receiving some state aid, some county aid, they actually sent the parent away to a reform school until she, like a sort of a workhouse, like a settlement house in a way, where she had to pay some debt for having a baby while she was in the care of the state, receiving some monies. That forced separation from me and my mother. That fostered more and more anger and resentment and trauma and pain for my mom. And so that's the world I came into with my beloved mother.
Yeah.
Heavy, right? And so was she equipped at 14 to raise a child? No. She disappeared from my life straight away, going to this workhouse, this detention center for girls. Immediate separation, immediate abandonment. So I had issues too.
Yeah.
In fact, I didn't live with my mom till she was 9 years old. So I'm saying all that to say, to frame how we were emotionally and mentally in relationship with one another. We had a lot of unresolved trauma and problems, deep-rooted resentments, my mother and I, that were very historical. And back in those days, it's not like today. You didn't really, therapy wasn't like, popping up on a Facebook feed,
Yeah.
culturally speaking, you kept your business to yourself. Or maybe you went to your pastor at your Baptist church, right? Or your church, right? But mostly you suffered and you endured. And so by the time my mom, our lives was characterized by that. And so we had what I described like an Ali and Frazier kind of relationship, right?
Yeah.
Like it was a lot of like both of us on the ropes, and then like we come
Yeah.
in and do battle in the middle of the ring. And
Yeah.
that's like Christmas, holidays, birthdays, and we're both guarded and we're both protecting and we're both still relating, that we were in relationship, but we weren't close, and we didn't have a warm connection as mom and daughter. And that's some of the milieu. That's how it was even up to the time of this call in the fall of 2015. And so when I tell you, when I took that drive down to Camden from my North Jersey home, when my mom called me to say something was wrong, and I got there and I could see straight away from the disarray in her home, from the way she was manic, from the garbage I saw in the refrigerator, from the paper strewn all over the place, from, there was just so evident, the smells in the house, that something was not right here. And of course, when I walk in, I'm like, is she breathing? Is she bleeding? Is she conscious? Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And now we got to what was really happening was all the confusion, all the anxiety, all of the disorientation that are featured marks of Alzheimer's dementia in the middle stages, which is what she was diagnosed with in the next 2 weeks.
Wow.
Quite shocking. But I had to say to myself, wow, like, what do you do with the resentments that are still there? I mean, what do I do? I'm like, I'm fighting bladder cancer at this time. I'm just having chemo. Like, physically, can I do this? Emotionally, can I do this? And, and of course I said yes. Of course I said yes. Of course I would say yes. And that started the journey. And then over the course of it, we received, in the midst of this dreadful disease, from the day in, day out, constancy of connection and being there for her and going to doctor's appointments, making sure she was well cared for, eating, resting. Her home was in a state of better repair, regular nutrition, better medication management, safety, companionship, joyful things, like making sure she was doing the things she loved, keeping her safe, doing those things day in and day out. In due course, by the middle of 2016, let's say, close to maybe the beginning of 2017, we had a breakthrough in this relationship of ours, where for the first time, mom articulated to me that she trusts me, that she loved me. Didn't hear that at all, and rarely in my adult life. And it came in a very weird way. She said, one day out of nowhere, she said, Boot, that's my family name. My friends told me that I should not have called you and asked you to come help me. Because if you said yes, you were only going to do it because you were going to steal my house and take all my money. And that's how she really was interacting with me. Just no trust, like testing all my motives, like, and then this one day, late 2016, early 2017, out of nowhere, she just looked at me and she said, I never really believed my friends. I knew you would do the right thing by me. And we hugged, I cried, and then our relationship elevated to this other place. And from there out, like, you wish you have a long life with your loved one. But no, Alzheimer's, you don't know when it will take you. You just know that it will take your life. And she happened to go down very quickly. But for that last year of her life, the joy in the moment with my mother, the holding hands, the intimacy, the closeness, I'll never, the look on her face when she saw me, she would light up. Something every kid wanted all their life to feel, to see, showed up. And it was the most amazing thing and the most beautiful thing. And it helped me so much to heal my own resentments and my own trauma around the mother I never had. And it ushered in for me what I only describe, and I describe it in the book, as really like this spiritual awakening for myself that rested on faith and forgiveness and letting go of the resentment and the anger and the pain of the past, and learning how to just sit with my mom in the moment and to find joy there. And the practice of meditation, the practice of mindfulness, the seeking help with therapy to really nurture and care for me, all the self-care things I needed to do in the physical, emotional, and spiritual domains allowed me to manage the cancer, and to, with grace and without killing myself, take on the responsibility of caring for my mother until she passed away in January 2019. And that's what I write about in the book, the arc of all of that, the day in, the day out, heartbreaking, backbreaking work of caregiving, the physical, emotional, financial, social impact of all of that, and the spiritual, the miracles that we encountered along the way. And so I know I talked a whole lot, but that is in a nutshell, I think, what this book is about. And I appreciate you giving me the space to say all of that. Davidson, I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, it's not easy, right? In many ways, I can relate to so much of what you're saying. It was, even still to this day, just simply being with my mom is one of the most difficult things in my life. And the way you talk very openly about the forgiveness and the compassion you have and the understanding that she's lived a tough life, right? I can relate to everything that you're saying. And it's funny, right? Because on the surface, like, we're so different, right? But at the core, like with my mom and her, coming here as a refugee from Vietnam, and then her mom or her dad dying during the war, like when she was 6 years old. And when she came here, she was just in survival mode, right? When they moved to Camden, she literally came to the US with not even $1 in her. Like, it was just so hard for me to understand. So I literally spent 12 years where I didn't talk to her at all, really. Like, I tried everything I could just to leave. And when she called, I didn't even pick up the phone. I would, it was So I can really relate to what you're saying. And, you know, after going through therapy and the program that Liz and I went through, I remember holding her and us crying together, and just she just let everything loose. Like she was like, you know, like it's been really hard, like having you at a young age, and then had abortions, and then when the other, you know, when your dad left, I felt so helpless. I just wanted to commit suicide. Like I didn't want to be in this world anymore. And it was the first time I actually heard her, like first time I actually connected with her and saw her as a human being instead of this person that's supposed to be a certain way, you know? So I can relate
Mhm.
to a lot of what you're saying because, you know, it's tough, you know. She's gone through a
Yeah,
lot.
well, that's beautiful, Davidson. And I'm telling you, I carried that for 50 years.
Wow.
And for you to, I think one of the takeaways from this experience, one of the regrets of the experience, I should say, is that I regret that I didn't do it sooner, get to that place of compassion.
Mm,
Um, uh, and because it would have saved both of us a lot of suffering and a lot of misery. And that you at your age, in your generation, and again, I think some of it's like we just have better access. Like it's like help seeking
yeah.
is so much better normalized and
Yeah.
affirmed now in
Mm,
2021 than it was in, 1965,
yeah.
1975, 1985. So I think that's beautiful that you came to this um, much sooner than I did. And then now you can derive some of the benefits now that, I see her, I see you, we see each
Mm,
other as human beings. Now you
mm,
derive the benefits of this relationship in a way that you wouldn't have before. Um, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that my mother and I are both lesbians, and she came out in the 50s, and I came out in the um, late 70s, early 80s. What a difference that time made um, for contrast. Like we had two very different experiences. Some of the resentment that was between my mother and I had to do with the fact that I was always out and proud and
mm,
about out loud,
yeah.
and that's because I was the beneficiary of a movement
Mm,
that had been working on all of that, right?
yeah.
And I had less shame. I was more visible. Um, there was less rejection of it in the community at large. It was more
Mm,
tolerated. And certainly my trans and gay brothers, sisters suffered way more than I did as a lesbian woman, and they still do today.
yeah.
But compared to her, police raids, police harassment, I remember my mother beat someone up because they called her a bull dagger, and that was dangerous. It was dangerous to stand up and fight someone, because then you run the risk of a justice system that is always slanted toward the poor and people of color, always biased against, right? But so she had much more ridicule, so therefore she was more closeted, she was more invisible. And there was always this issue. Like, my friends used to say to me, "Oh, Barb, man, your mom's gay. That must have been so cool growing up with her." I was like, "You don't know. It was not cool. It was one of our edges." And so, like, I have a chapter in the book called Rainbow Mommy, because I want people to understand that this intergenerational and this generational trauma around her sexual identity and her sexual orientation, and how interfacing a system that is predicated on sort of Eurocentric and heteronormative assumptions, whether it's doctors' offices, nursing facilities, housing, thinking about housing plans in later life. Like I just read today in the Times that that the mayor of New York City is developing housing for LGBTQ plus homeless people, right? Like, yeah, there's some unique needs around the LGBTQ community. And, we, I like people to see and read about some of these challenges, because we've got to do, I'm a social worker, so we got to press for structural changes around a lot of these things, around more mental health support, around more support to our aging parents, about better health care, even like what President Biden is proposing in the infrastructure plans, right? Which is seeing that human infrastructure is an important place to invest also. That
Yeah.
means
Yeah.
more caregivers, looking at the parents who have children and who are caring for parents, and figuring out a way to bolster that, so you don't do like me and lose $40,000 of your savings to care for your parent. Structural changes have to happen, and it's only gonna happen if we press for some of those things. And it's particularly important that people in underrepresented groups, young people, all ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, the poor, people on the margins, working class people, that we actively share our lived experience so that we can influence the way some of these decisions are made at the local, state, and national levels. Very important.
Yeah, it's so interesting you mentioned that. I do think, the folks that control the media or the mainstream media look a certain way, right? So when you grow up and you only see, white folks that look a certain way, it's hard for you to really identify or even have compassion for folks that don't look like that, right? So, there's just not enough diversity of stories out there. And, I think Netflix is doing a good job where we're finally starting to see diversity. Whereas, I mean, pretty much my whole life prior to Netflix, like you didn't see anytime, even just seeing an Asian actor, I'm like, oh my God, like that's so nice to see that it's possible now. Now people can actually have compassion for us. It's interesting. And then see, it's tough. My grandmother has Alzheimer's, and just to see the relationships, she had 12 kids, so just to see the fighting and just a lot of the breakdowns, people don't talk to each other anymore. It's really sad, right? Because there's just it's tough, because I think what they do now is that she lives with a different daughter or son every 3 months. So, but you could see that the the daughter that and sons that don't have the financial means to have like to hire to have like an extra room, they're being judged because they're like, oh, you don't care about the family. So then it's like the cultural norms, like it's just a very complex situation. But yeah, just the amount of arguing and yelling and name calling and making each other wrong, it's just very sad to see all of that.
Absolutely. It's just heartbreaking any way you look at it, right?
Yeah.
Like I had to buck a family norm, and that was that I placed my mother into a nursing home. See, I think sometimes we think, um, we can't put ourselves in the equation around self-care when we're caring for our loved ones. And I'm always reminded of the very simple thing about like when you're on an airplane and they say, hey, if we hit turbulence and lose cabin pressure, like these oxygen masks are going to come down. And they say straight away, like, look, if you're a parent with a kid in your lap, put the mask on yourself first and then
Yeah.
put it on that child.
Yeah.
And that I always remember that, like I am no good to my mother. I was no good to my mother if I wasn't caring for me first.
Right.
And for me, the housing question was a very challenging one because, look, with Alzheimer's, the fact is more and more care will be needed.
Yeah.
And I did my level best to keep her, you know, coddling together. I call it like, I was like a conductor of an orchestra. And I just brought in all the different instruments I needed, and I had to manage a symphony of
Mm.
help.
Hmm.
You know, caregivers, paid ones from the family, agency help. You know, there were things related to the house, there were things related to medicine, there were things
Mm.
related to food, like all the different things when you think about the complexity of one human being's life. And
Yeah.
I had to orchestrate and manage all that. But then, and that was to keep her in her home. That was to keep her in her home. And you know, taking away the car, making sure she was safe, making sure she could work the locks in the house, and put the shades down at night and answer a telephone properly, right? She could
Yeah.
cook without any emergency situation, right? No fires, right? And we
Yeah.
did that as long as we could. And then the question came, like, all right, what do we do now that we know she needs more help? You
Yeah.
know, one day my mom's aide was leaving the house, and this was right after my mother's 74th birthday. We had this big party for her. And I would say to everybody, look, she's rapidly forgetting who we all are. She was barely remembering who I was at that time.
Yeah.
And I said, look, this could be the last time that she'll know who you are. I'm really
Mm.
urging you to come to this party and celebrate my mother. And,
Mm.
you know, and lots of people came from her bowling community, from her
Aw.
card community. She was an avid bowler. My mother was a serious athlete, I'm telling you. She could have been a pro bowler. Um, in fact, yeah, anyway, I'll tell you that's another story. But anyway, you know, big feast, lots of fun, family, friends, you know, it was fantastic.
Aw.
And then that night when we were leaving after everyone left, my mother asked me to come upstairs when they put her to bed. And she said, I said, hey, what'd you think of your party? She said, she was barely remembering she had a party, right?
Mm.
And I said, man, people sure do love you. And she said, you really think they do? And I go, of course, mommy, they do. They love you. She goes,
Aw.
she says, even though I'm gay, you think they love me?
Mm.
It was so sad, right? And
Yeah.
so I was like, God, especially because you're gay. I'm like, come on, they
Mm.
love you. And I said, look, I'm going to go home now. We've been there all day. It was a long day. I'll be back on Tuesday. I'm going to bring you a video, you know, because I took lots of good pictures and I made a video. So I came back that Tuesday just as the aide was leaving because I wanted her to see this video as well. And so the aide left and I was making lunch for my mom. And then the doorbell rings and it's the aide again. And we're like, uh, everything okay? Did you forget something? She's like, I have to show you something, little Barbara. That's what she called me around my mom,
Little Barbara.
little Barbara. Um, and she um, started with juggling keys. She was holding keys and they were my mother's keys. And I'm like, what? Oh, you walked out with my mom's keys. And she said, no, I found these keys under the rose bush outside. And I'm like, oh my God, game changer.
Yeah.
And of course, when I asked my mom about it, she says, first thing she says is the cat threw him out there. The second thing she said was, oh, I must have dropped it when I went to Kmart around the corner. There is no Kmart around the corner.
Yeah.
And the third thing she said is, what the hell? Am I a prisoner in my own damn house? So what? My keys are out there. You know? And I just looked at her and I said, Mom, what have we been saying since day one about you and your home, this beautiful home of yours? What have we been saying? Safety first, right? She said, yeah, safety first. Said it a million times to her. I defined it, said what it was. And she said, and I said, so you know what this means, right? She says, I have to move to be safe. I go,
Mm.
yepper, you have to move to be safe.
Mm.
And she wanted to live with me and Kay. Listen, I'm in a 1,000 square foot house. I'm fighting cancer. the experiences I had with my mother in my little condo here, and the times that she visited us were not good ones.
Yeah.
Falling, sliding out of the bed, falling in the bathroom. And I was just like, okay, here's a decision. Here's a decision point. And I have to put me above my mom. Now,
Mm.
fortunately, I had to put me first and say, what could I really, really handle? The day in and day out care? No, the family wasn't going to do it. None of her siblings were able to care for her. And I had to buck the family norm, and I placed my mom in a nursing home. Now,
Mm.
lucky for us, we applied for the Medicaid program about 15 months or so prior. And in Camden County, because of the combination of uh, uh, not many staff in the County Board of Social Services office and the um, deluge of applications that they get there from people in need, meant for a very long processing time for the Medicaid application. But I'm going to tell you, when it was approved just in the nick of time. And that's the only plan that pays for a poor person's long-term health care needs. Medicare doesn't do it. Medicaid does it, or you pay out of your own pocket. And we're talking 10 to 16 to 18 to $20,000 a month is the
Yeah.
cost for around the clock care. So
Mm.
when I say, we didn't have that money, well, thankfully the application was approved. We moved her to a nursing home. My family was a little like, really? You trust them? You trust the care to, and you know
Mm.
what? I didn't place her there and forget about her. I placed her there and continued being her caregiver and
Mm.
continued to be her daughter who was on top of it all. And I'm gonna tell you, I know there's a lot of myths about about healthcare facilities, about nursing homes, and you got to shop around and you got to find the right ones.
Yeah.
But the quality of her experience and the quality of anyone's experience is related to the kind of engagement the family has with the facility.
Mm. Mm.
That's very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the real sad cases in those environments are people that have no one in their lives.
Yeah.
Like my mother's roommate. She didn't have anybody coming to visit her. So we adopted her.
Oh.
So when we bought flowers to mom, we bought her flowers. When we bought treats, we gave her treats. When we had holiday gatherings, we wanted her at our table to sit with us.
Mm.
I held her hand many nights just as I held my mother's hands. And because those are the unfortunate cases, really. But otherwise, stay engaged. I bucked the family norm. I got her the care she needed. I was able to protect myself from the onslaught of the stress of
Mm.
trying to figure out how to make it work in my own house. And I felt guilty for a little while. And then I realized, no, I could make a decision like that. And I didn't need my family's support. I was the person in charge and had the authority to make that decision. And I made that decision.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a not an easy decision, but
Not easy.
I do see how my family, my dad's side of the family is dealing with it, and then my wife's like, how they, and I'm like, man, I talked to my mom about it. She's like, you know what, like put me in a home because it looks very stressful, and I wouldn't want to put that burden on you. So my mom, I think she gets it. But I do see my, like you said, the eldest. So similar in the Asian families, like the eldest daughter also takes on that burden. So my sister kind of raised her hand and was like, hey, like I'll be the one that will be, managing a lot of that. All I need from you guys is just financially to support me and, obviously come visit too. But
Hmm.
we're very lucky that we had this, we're having this conversation this early on, just so that
That's right.
we're on the same
Absolutely.
page.
And
Yeah.
that's the key to, look, every family's different. You know your resources, you know how many of you there are, You know what the budget accounts are, you know what your assets are, you know what assets you can liquidate to help in the moment. Yeah, so these are very individual decisions to make. The important thing that I really like this so much is that, you know, you do talk about it actively, you discuss it, you plan for it. Like, that's one of my big takeaways from this whole experience. Like I had indicated before, I had some regrets, but I also, there's some lessons learned that I like to talk about when I do talk about this experience. And one is that, yeah, you know, you do have to plan for it. You have to plan for it. And that means you have to pay attention to things like, do I have catastrophic health care for myself? If I'm a solopreneur, if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm in my own business, do I have disability insurance? Like, buy the insurance. Like, we're good at like health insurance, but get the disability insurance as well. You know, consult an elder lawyer, right? So that you know how to legally and safely safeguard your assets. My mother had a house. This was a major accomplishment for a woman who came from her background, right? The poverty, etc. She was tenacious with work. She was a hustler from way back. She taught me that work ethic. She taught me the value of education. She sacrificed so much so I could get a high school education, an undergraduate degree, a graduate degree, and a doctoral degree. That's all on my mother's watch. That's my mother inculcating in me the value of education and how to transition from the place of our family's history to a better place in our society. All right. She sacrificed a lot. She had some assets. She had a life insurance policy. She had this house, you know, she had a car. There's a lot of mythology about what one has to surrender in terms of assets to get help from the state with Medicaid for long-term care. Talk to a lawyer, get the right information, and do it before they need it. You know? Do it before they need the help. And that catastrophic care is very important. And also, you know, something as simple as savings, you know, like you really got to put money in the bank and you got to save for these kinds of life circumstances. And you got to advocate, as I said before, for policy changes that give us paid leave to care for our children, to care for our parents. These are policies that are in the pipeline that seem to me to be like, you know, I don't know why they're partisan issues, because whether you're independent, Republican, Democrat, or whatever, you got a parent who's old and who's going to need care. And you yourself are susceptible to needing care, right? So, but anyway, it's a domain we have to operate in. We have to advocate and press the influencers for policy changes. I can't say that enough. And the other thing has to do in the area of funerals. And you're talking about care with your family. Try talking about before you need it. Now,
Yeah.
in our situation, my mother actually, once we placed her in the home, she was approved for the Medicaid. We got to place her in the long-term care facility close to my house, which is really no longer was it a 4 time a week, you know, 2-hour drive going and coming, stressful. But we had to sell her house. And it was considered an asset that, you know, I had to account for when I made the application. And then you have to spend down this money. It's a 5-year, 60-month look back period in order to receive Medicaid. And you have to meet the financial requirement after you spend down all your assets. And so basically my mother was living on $1,700 a month. It was well below the threshold for receiving the benefit. But she did have this house that was worth, in Camden, not worth a whole lot, but it was still a house that had value.
Right.
And so the deal was, once we placed her and Medicaid started paying for her care, like I said, $8,000 to $12,000 or plus a month, we had to sell the house and then surrender the proceeds to social services.
Oh.
Okay. Now, my mom's house only sold for $35,000. This is Camden City.
Yeah.
Okay. And we were allowed to do a couple of deductions before surrendering the full amount to them. Like I said, I was able to deduct all the expenses related to selling the house. I had to keep the utilities on, do these other sort of things. I had to hire a moving company to move all the stuff out. I had to get a dumpster to throw all the stuff out. There were legitimate expenses. And then the other expense was a trust that we could set up for a prepaid funeral.
Mm.
And they don't say it has to be the cheapest funeral. They said,
Oh, okay.
Create a funeral
Hmm.
that your mother deserves.
Oh.
So by the time we do the funeral and pay the other things off, I think I surrendered like $20,000 or $18,000 to social services. 1 month of care. So look, it don't take a rocket scientist to figure out who made out in that deal.
Yeah.
It is a valuable, important program for people who are poor and working poor. Okay. But having those discussions with my mom about her funeral, every detail, the kind of casket she wanted, the kind of service, who she wanted to eulogize her, what food she wanted in the repast, what she wanted to wear, what her favorite colors were, what she wanted on her headstone. All these things we discussed over time. Did she want to be buried or cremated? Those are very important. I tell a story in the book about her absolute fear of being burned, because in her mind, she wanted to present herself to the God of her understanding as a full, intact human being in her Sunday best. And she wanted to ask God one question: did you love me even though I was gay? That was what my mother wanted to ask God in the afterlife.
Wow.
This is what she told me. So I said to her, I'm going to meet whatever your wishes are, Mom, I'm going to do it. You want me to utilize you do the eulogy? Absolutely. And then she said, I want you to cook the repast meal too, because you make good food. I'm like, look, you have to remember, this is the day of your funeral. There's going to be hundreds of people there. I am not going to cook food also. And she's like, oh, well, that's all right then. Let's just go to my favorite Chinese restaurant and get people shrimp and broccoli. This is what she says,
That's funny.
And that's what we did.
Aww.
Had a fabulous repast at my favorite Chinese restaurant here in Secaucus. So anyway, very important to have those conversations. And I'm so like delighted to hear that in your generation, and for all these listeners who are listening to your podcast, who are people who are heart-centered, who are people who are into like their own personal human development, transformation, who are seeking, to live their best lives, to be their authentic selves, to be in right relationship with other people. Like this audience of young people today, I'm so impressed with you all that you're talking about mental health, and you're talking about family conflict. You're talking about getting help through coaching and therapy, and that you're having these hard conversations about how I'm going to age with grace and dignity in this world, and be happy, to have happiness. I'm just so impressed with your generation, and a little envious as well, because I wish we were in that place of 30, 20 years ago, 30 years of my life. But no, I think it's just fantastic that you're having these kinds of conversations with your peers.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Like it is really uncomfortable to ask your mom, like, oh, what would you want to be cremated? Would you want to, how would you, what type of casket would you want? Like even that conversation with my mom was very uncomfortable, but I'm like, would you want to give your bags to like this, my sister's like, would you want us to set, like, what do you want us to do? Right. And she was very uncomfortable, but she's like, but it was helpful, right? Because then now we know, like, so yeah, it is. And then now we're starting to save for her long-term care, and we have money set aside. And but yeah, it is very uncomfortable. Like she was like, why? She's like, I'm so young. Why are we having this conversation? I'm like, Mom, like, trust me, like it's good to have it now so we know what you want, right? Like what if you're not able to communicate as effectively in 20, 30 years, right? So what do you want, but yeah, it was extremely uncomfortable. She did not like it. She's like,
Oh,
this
I'm
is so
sure.
weird. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
and I like what she said to you too. You referenced this earlier. She just said, "I wouldn't want to be a burden to you." I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's so terrific, and I think I would like to see more parents, think about that. Like, what are they leaving behind for their children to do? I'm still clearing. I'm still going through my mother's papers. I'm still like
Mm.
I'm still going through some of her effects, So, like, do we need everything in our homes? Can we simplify things? I mean, like
Yeah.
my wife and I moved from a 3,000 square foot home in Jersey City to this 1,000 square foot apartment we now live in, this condo we now live in. And part of the impetus for us making that decision was because of the experience I had clearing out my mother's home.
Yeah.
And Kay said, and Kay has two children. My wife, Kay Osborne, has a chapter about her in the book as well. You don't do any of this, look, if you're fortunate to find love and companionship and a partner, a true partner. Kay and I have been together for 29 years. I'm a very blessed person with Kay. She's been with me every step of the way. She was
Mm.
not a shadowy figure in the background as I
Mm.
was doing all this caregiving. She was there every step of the way with me.
Mm.
And, she took notice of this experience. And she has,
Mm.
my stepson Ian and my stepdaughter Tanya and their families. And she said, I'm not going to do that to them. I'm going to learn to let go. I'm going to
Mm.
learn to detach from all of this stuff I have accumulated.
Mm.
And we reduced, as I said, from 3,000 square feet to 1,000 square foot. Made a lot of hard decisions about where to send stuff and all that. But
Mm.
we did it. And that was a gift to her children. It's a gift to her kids.
Mm.
And I think that's a lesson for a lot of people. Just to think about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it was funny. My sisters and I were just throwing out stuff that she's been holding on to.
Mm-hmm.
And we just threw out everything. We're like, Mom, this is literally from 30 years ago. Like, please let us throw it out. And it was so difficult. And same with my grandma, right? Like literally stuff from 50 years ago. I'm like, Grandma, like, but I love it. Like it's coming from a place of love, right? Like it's funny.
Mm-hmm.
Every time her friends like will get takeout, like pho, whatever, she keeps the containers because she knows like when we come back to visit, she packs food for us, right? So little did I know she was holding on to 100 used containers that she washed because she's like, oh, I want to be able to give my grandkids food. And we're like, Grandma, you don't need to hold on to 100 containers, like 10 is
Right.
enough. But if it's coming from
Right.
love, but it's just funny. So yeah, we
That's
we,
right. Of
we went through,
course.
I think we went to 8 hours of throwing out stuff. And I'm like, are you really gonna use this? We're like, yeah, we're gonna use it. I'm like, no, you haven't. This is collecting cobwebs. Like, you're not gonna use it. So
That's
yeah,
right.
it's funny.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we're so fortunate, right, to have family to help and, partners to help. And, going through this alone would be very difficult. And I think there are people like that. And I would say to people, if anyone listening here doesn't have a family to support them, who is isolated, to reach out for help, because there's a lot of organizations out here.
Mm.
uh, you know People understand that Alzheimer's, dementia, and all the other dementias, there's a burgeoning pandemic epidemic around this. This is a burgeoning public health crisis.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the statistics are staggering. 6 million people today. By 2060, 13 million brains in the US are going to be living with Alzheimer's. A
Wow.
woman woman in her 60s is twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's over the course of her lifetime than breast cancer.
Wow.
Alzheimer's begins to develop in the brain 20 to 30 years before the actual diagnosis,
Huh.
right? And 2/3 of those diagnosed with Alzheimer's right now are women. No one knows why.
Huh.
And 2/3 of the caregivers are women. And
Wow.
many of them have to leave their jobs and their economic subsistence and resign from work and that sort of thing. This is all facts coming from the Women's Alzheimer's Movement organization. This is the
Mm.
group that Maria Shriver runs out in California.
Mm.
Her parents had Alzheimer's, and she made a life devoted to getting good information out to people.
Mm.
And I'm saying all that to say that there is help. There's WAM, Women Alzheimer's Movement. In the New Jersey area, I support an organization called the Act Now Foundation. This organization's run by Christine Allen and Carrie Lopez. They're located in Hudson County.
Mm.
They have support groups. They provide information. They advocate for legislative changes. For example, in the state of New Jersey, just 2 years ago, because of their advocacy, now when a person dies in the state of New Jersey from Alzheimer's, it must be listed on the death certificate.
Oh.
And we didn't have that law before Act Now was in New Jersey.
Right.
Okay.
Huh.
And that means we now get a more accurate read of the number of people impacted by Alzheimer's.
Mm.
And of course, we know, just like with the census and other kinds of ways we calibrate, demographics in our country, that's how policy decisions are made.
Mm.
Resources flow
Mm.
based on the impact to real people's lives.
Mm.
And so that's something Act Now does. And when people buy my book, because they were so enormously helpful to me with support groups and companionship and education and their friendship, because they're now my friends, dear friends now. It got me, support carried me through. I make a donation to Act Now Foundation for every book that is sold.
Mm.
I give them 20% of all the net profits, and I'm going to do that in perpetuity for as long as this book has life and breath.
Mm.
My mom's story will bless people and bless that organization so they can continue to do their good work. So those are the two organizations I'm very tied into, but there are many, many, many others. Alzheimer's Organization, Association of New Jersey, etc. The Caring Kind organization in New York City, which used to be the Alzheimer's Association of New York City. So there are plenty of organizations. You don't have to face it alone.
Mm.
You can get help. You can get free services. You can get what you need for your journey. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Thank you so much, Barbara. So many takeaways. I think, it's never too early to start planning, right? I think it can be uncomfortable at first, but I think the call to action is speak to your parents, ask what they want, right? I think it'll save a lot of headache. It'll save a lot of, just being intentional. Like you said, talk to a life insurance plan, long-term care, like as early as possible so that the burden isn't placed upon, your kids. There's so many call to actions.
Yeah.
And like you said, especially people of color, right? I think, like you said, mental health is becoming less stigmatized. It's becoming more open, but still we have a long way to go. And, I think everyone can benefit from therapy and, just talking about these things that are tough, right? I think there's so many, even in Vietnamese culture, right? They don't, there's still a lot of work to be done. They think that only if you have like really serious mental illness would you go see a therapist, right? But that's not true. So I think we have a long way to go, and there's a lot of room. And like you said, people are starting to talk about it earlier, like around my age, but there's still a lot more. And yeah, thanks, Barbara. Thanks for creating the space and being so vulnerable and being so open. And your book is amazing. I'm definitely going to recommend it to a lot of, my friends and family that are going through caring for the parents that are encountering very similar hardships. And yeah, really appreciate you and your support and you always being so there for everyone and just being of service and being a blessing in our lives.
Oh, thank you so much, Davidson. And I have a mantra through a lot of this, which is you can hate the Alzheimer's, but love the person.
Hmm.
Hate the disease, but love the person.
Mm,
And if we lead with love, we'll get through it. We'll
mm.
get through it. And I very much appreciate, love yourself, take care of yourself. And thank you so much for spreading this message to folks. I think you're an amazing young person and all the good that you put into the world. And I appreciate it so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Barbara.
if people want the book, they can get it at www.heeding heedingthecaregivercall.com. www.heedingthecaregivercall.com, and you can get your copy that way.
I'll post it in the show notes.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Be well.